Good afternoon. Well, it's 82 degrees and there's no wind at all. It's overcast. It was quite sunny earlier, and that's the Jefferson Report. Holly and I went and looked at a bunch of British cars, antiques, and that was kind of fun. Sat in the cars. I got too much sunlight perhaps for my Irish face, Irish skin. The talking heads today are egregious. It's interesting that after a conviction, some of the same talking heads that criticized Trump for how he discussed the trial are themselves attacking the trial. I've mentioned before, perhaps, that my grandfather and I, when I was 7 or 8, we'd visit him on Sundays, and he'd have cheese Danish, things I shouldn't be eating at any age, but it was marvelous. And we'd watch the talking heads. And the two of us would shout at the talking heads. I always was shouting about them not answering the question. Hints of things to come in my own life. And one time, my dad said, forgive me for repeating this story for those who haven't heard it before, but my dad said to my grandfather, "Hey, Pop, what do you listen to those guys for? They just lie." My dad had no use for politicians. I was the only politician that, as far as I know, he ever gave a contribution to when I ran for Congress. And my grandfather gave as good as my dad gave him. It was something to watch. I could see genetically where I came from. And then I think when my dad walked away, my grandfather felt guilty about disagreeing with my father. I didn't examine it this way at the time, but looking back on it, because I remember it vividly. And he said, well, you know, maybe your dad is right. And I had that feeling today listening to the talking head shows. In particular, it struck me on ABC. It was like one after another. We had these people bashing, talking the party line about our court system, the judge, the jury, the crimes that were brought, that the grand jury brought, everything. You feel when people tell lies such as these, publish distortions such as these, that there's a desperation. Now, maybe that's a quaint belief on my part that somewhere in all of these public criminals who would lie and mislead us is a person who once believed in telling the truth, who believed in being responsible, who believed in carefully informing the public because they credited what they were told by these elected officials. So we have all of that. But I suspected, and do increasingly, that the ones who are calling the shots are the wealthy. They're affecting our public policy, if you will. Some of you have probably read Toni Morrison, a great writer, a great thinker, a leader. And she wrote lots of essays in addition to books and speeches and all manner of things. And there's a segment, if I can remember it correctly, in which she said, we live in a world where justice equals vengeance. Now that's interesting because there are two brands of justice right now. Trump's justice is vengeance against those who would dare to criticize him, in or out of the party, among the voters or not, on the bench or not. And his slanders, his masterful, citified trash talk is calculated to push back those who disagree with him. But Toni Morrison went further than that. She said, we live in a world where justice equals vengeance, where private profit drives public policy. That's what we're seeing on the air. When we're attacking courts and everything else, these proceedings that are to protect a republic and a democracy, that are to hold people accountable for crimes, are our public policy. But it can be, pardon the expression, trumped by private profit. And so the consequence that Tony mentions in this quote that I'm concerned about is that where the body of civil liberties, one cell by cell, bone by bone, by the dead, withers in the searing heat of all war, all the time, and we're facing eternal war, respect for even interest in humanitarian solutions can dwindle. She's talking about us, she's talking about now, and she may be talking about all time. So I say this on Sunday, Talking Heads Day, and maybe you should dust off your younger copy of Karl Marx and look at the economic class and what are the possible things they want. No new taxes, it's about to come up, it's about to change. Old gas and oil wants no regulation. The faux Christians that take up so much of our time want a holy war with Muslims. And you'd almost think that they want so many children so they can grow up and be the warriors in this war. Anyone else who doesn't toe the line, beware. Now, more precisely, these news outlets, and particularly ABC this weekend, I noted, bash the prosecution, minimize the offense, and plead to let them alone. That whatever you do, don't put them in jail. Are we the royal subjects of a potentate who commits crimes that would defy and deny to him the notion of a benevolent dictator? Yeah, I think so. So that's how it is. That's how it is right now. And if there's one thing that we've noticed about the strategy by which Trump and the Republicans and the hidden wealthy interests are working this, is let's delay democracy. You know, we see abroad Netanyahu doing his shuffle, buying time so that he can destroy Hamas, but more than that, all those men, women, and children who are non-combatants, who are not Hamas. It's not acceptable. The Republicans tell the big lies. No fair elections, no real conviction, you name it, and it's not real. It's a mirage. And you have to ask how 30% of our population, look to your right and left, and there's a good chance there's a person you think is intelligent, always thought they were reliable, and they're taken by this Republican swill. They say it, they defend it, and they say he's better than Biden. Well, Trump now can say Florida felons for Trump because he's one of them. And they're talking about ways he should be able to vote. Do we have this picture upside down or not? How can he vote? That's what we're concerned about. How can he run for president? How can he run for president when he might get a sentence of 4 years? He would be incapable of serving the office. What is wrong with the Republicans? Are they so certain they can ride this out right up until they smash into a wall? It's not our fault that Trump tried his usual two-step in court with his relatively inexperienced counsel who couldn't convince him that he should at least try to fashion a defense. But there's no injustice here because he didn't have a defense. And to that extent, the lawyers were, I don't know, barely competent, I suppose. So Trump is now on a campaign to denigrate every institution in America. People have asked, have great leaders gone to prison and then been a leader in the nation? Well, there's one at least that comes to mind. He wrote Mein Kampf after he was convicted and put in prison. That was Hitler. Hitler went to jail. Hitler came out and campaigned until he had crushed the government and taken over. Could that be Trump's plan? Of course it could be. That's who he is. So our objective is to try to keep honest our politicians, to ask the questions that matter. Trump, how can you possibly run for president if there's now a good chance that just one of the 4 cases pending against you could result in a 4-year sentence? Shouldn't you step aside for somebody else? Trump, isn't it true you can't pardon yourself? That's what Nixon understood, and that's why he was pardoned by his vice president. He stepped down from the office, and his vice president pardoned him. How are you going to do that? Trump, are you prepared to accept a pardon if it should come in some way to your attention that would basically be you conceding that you had committed the offense in order to receive the pardon? What about that? Mr. Trump, are you going to pardon anyone else should you become president? Mr. Trump, how do you think leading a ticket in a year in which every congressman is up for election, is that fair to them? Do they have to choose to support you, or will you go after them if they don't support you and force them to risk losing those seats that Republicans have? Mr. Trump, how can you be a leader of your party when basically you're exposing it to perhaps the greatest defeat in American history? Jefferson basically crushed the opposition by his tour of duty in office. Wouldn't it be ironic that Biden would accomplish the same thing with a strong assistance from you, just as Jefferson, in my opinion, had a strong assistance, forced error, if you will, by John Adams? So, Mr. Trump, is there any limit to your egotistical ambitions to further yourself? Mr. Trump, is there any person on this planet in which you give them trust? Mr. Trump, have you ever assisted a woman obtain an abortion? Mr. Trump, do you believe that a woman should be able to get an abortion? Mr. Trump, do you believe a woman who has been raped by a family member should have to carry a child to birth? Mr. Trump, do you believe a woman who's ill should have to risk even death rather than having an abortion? Mr. Trump, do you believe that what's going on in Gaza is a war crime when men, women, and children, non-combatants, are being killed by Israel? Mr. Trump, would you cut off support to Israel if Netanyahu wouldn't listen to America, a longtime ally and supporter of Israel? Mr. Trump, can't you see you have no business being President of the United States. Mr. Trump, this election, I think, is going to be about you. And I don't know how you can stand up with only 30% of the voters when it comes time to cast a ballot on election day. So, those are a few thoughts I have. And I say goodbye to you today from my cathedral of trees. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.